dear to me is your dwelling, O Lord of hosts. My soul has a desire and longing for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh rejoice in the living God. The sparrow has found her a house, and the swallow a nest where she may lay her young. By the side of your altars, O Lord of hosts, my King and my God. Happy are they who dwell in your house. They will always be praising you. Happy are the people whose strength is in you, whose hearts are set on the pilgrim's way. The sparrow has found her a house. The whole creation has a home next to the altar of the Lord. Even the animals find safe places to be. This psalm is useful for people who have spent time away from their sanctuary, as we have, but it's also useful for people who don't have a sanctuary. It's probably most important to people in the diaspora, especially to Jews who don't get to go to their temple anymore. It's a psalm that reminds us that the desire for God is part of human nature, that our souls desire and long for the presence of God, the same way that the whole creation does, that the sparrows do, that the swallows do. Sparrows and swallows spend a lot of time living with humans. We have a bird feeder in our backyard, and we look at it, and every day I ask Molly, what kind of bird is that? And sometimes she can tell me, and she says, oh, that's a Carolina wren, or that's a house sparrow, or something like that. And sometimes she just says, oh, that's a little brown bird. And she's got books, and she's looking for them, but they're everywhere. Sparrows and swallows and robins, all of these things love to live with humans. And they're everywhere in our neighborhoods. They're not rare birds. They're the kind of birds that like to make nests in houses. And they apparently also liked to make nests in the temple. This is a detail that the poet might have known. Anyway, I don't know whether the sparrows or the swallows actually lived in the temple. I do know that bats and birds and mice and all kinds of things live in old churches, so it's not surprising to me if they do. But the point is that they like to be where they are safe. They like to be where they're warm, and so do we. It's a challenge to be far away from our temple. It's a challenge to be far away from the familiar. But I actually think the problem of being right now removed from our church communities and so many of our other communities is not in the buildings. It's not in the presence of God, because God can be in your house. God can be in the swallow's little nook in a tree. God doesn't have to be here, and only here. God is with us on pilgrimage as we journey from place to place. But there's a reason we have pilgrim stories and we have journeys to holy places. And that's because we have a longing for God. And so we fix God into holy places, like we do at the church. Our longing for community is bigger than that, though. And it reminds us that the church is not actually this building, as we know, but it reminds us in a new way. The story of Jesus going into the temple and talking with the elders there is a really good story to remind us that the temple for Jesus is his Father's house, not just because it's the holy place of Israel and he happens to be God. It's the holy place because it's part of his tradition, because it's part of his family tradition, because his parents are among the people who go along the pilgrim's way, because they have taught him what he needs to know about this place. He decided it was worth it to spend time there. And that's how it works for our children too, and our grandchildren. We teach them to see this place and all the places where God lives as holy. And we don't teach them that by simply bringing them to church and exposing them to religion. We don't just apply it to them. We do it, and you know this. through our love, through our relationships, through our adoption of this church family. By seeing ourselves as part of a bigger community, we teach our children how to be community people. We've run into a lot of problems with that this year. We've realized how much we need our community. This past year of isolation for many people has not been about deprivation of money or deprivation of housing. We are often safe in our homes. And of course, there are people who are not. There are people who are struggling, not having enough food, not having safe homes to make their nests in. There are those situations, but for a lot of people in our community, that hasn't been the case. What has been is that we've realized that we are not made to be alone. And here we are, reminded every day in our scripture that we long to be with God, and we long to be in God's place. And being in God's place means being with God's people on the pilgrim journey. When I was a child, I had a friend in my church. She was probably 70 when I met her, and I was 3. And she was a person who spent all of her time at church on Sunday. She went to all the church services. She sat in the front row. And she did it because she didn't have a family that was alive. Her parents had died. Her fiancé had died. And she didn't have a group of people at home to be with. So for her, going to be with God at church also meant going to be with her family and her friends. She spent all of Sunday at church if she could, and various people would drive her to church and bring her home, and various people in the church would visit her during the week, but I got to have a visit with her every Saturday. I got to spend time with her for years as a child, just playing games, just playing blocks, putting together puzzles, doing imagination things. And it's a little odd now that I think about it that I had such a friendship with someone who was so old. But she wasn't that old. She wasn't that old because she saw herself as part of a family of all ages. And she was also one of the most devout and prayerful people that I've ever known. She prayed for every single person in the church. She didn't have a lot of activities that she did. In fact, I think she probably would have made it really well during coronavirus, because what she did was stay home and write poems and visit people when they came to see her and pray. She lived in God's house all the time, even when she wasn't at church. And she was an example to me of how it's possible to live in God's house all the time. And so as a little child, even though I didn't know it, I was learning what it meant from this person. She was like an adopted grandmother. Her name was Emmy. She died possibly 15 years ago. I can't quite remember. But I went back for her funeral, having not been there in almost 20 years. And it was like being back with my family again. Because the people who knew her knew me. And the people who knew her knew each other, because she kept us in connection. And it was amazing. This is what the house of God is like. This is what it's like to live in the dwelling of the Lord of hosts for your whole life. And all she did to have that kind of life was give in to the desire and the longing. All that she did was say, yes, I want to live in the courts of the Lord forever. And then she shared it with other people because she couldn't help it, because it was who she was. She loved people, and she talked to them, and she prayed for them, and she had more friends as a single woman by herself than most people I know. And she wasn't a major extrovert. She was a quiet person. But she had a family of God around her. And you read this in some of the stories of the saints as well. When you read about people who have their stories passed on, the holy people that we know, they are passed on because people knew who they were, even if they lived in a little hermitage next to the church, like Julian of Norwich. even if they lived in a convent, even if they were a monk who barely talked to anyone. They were people that were known because they were part of God's family. This is something we can have even when we're not together physically. We can have it by remembering our connections to each other. We can have it when we as parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles, of which I am, not a parent or a grandparent, but an aunt, when we remember that children look at us and they see how to live in the courts of the Lord. Of course, Jesus would be in the house of his Father. That's where you go to learn how to be part of the household of God. He did that. And he taught his parents something about it, that they shouldn't underestimate the way children are. They shouldn't underestimate that children have curiosity and knowledge, and that their playfulness is part of their learning. And that spending time with children and helping them to learn about God is actually the whole purpose of our lives as Christians. It nurtures our own faith to spend time with people who are present to God in the way that children are. I didn't ever get to talk to Emmy, my adopted grandmother, about the impact that I had on her as a 3-year-old. But I think that I did. I think that spending time with a young person who liked to play and also loved God was probably helpful to her. It probably helped her with the fact that she didn't actually get to get married and have children. It helped her to live a full life through all of its stages, as a grandparent, as an elder who could teach me things. And what she taught me was how to build really big towers out of spools of thread, and how to properly put a cat onto a rolling platform and keep it there. All kinds of things that are very important to know if you're going to live your life. She taught me things that are not maybe the most important life skills, but it was important to spend time with her and to live in the house of God with her. That was how I learned. And that is how people learn to be Christian. It's not actually at Sunday school. It's wonderful what we do with Sunday school. And Ms. Deb is wonderful at teaching children about God and helping them to ask questions. But you don't have to be a professional to do that. You can do it by being a member of the household of God, by remembering that you live here even when you're not here, that you live in the house of God your entire life. Happy are they who put their trust in you, O Lord of hosts. Happy are they who make the journey, who spend the time with children and each other in the house of the Lord. This week, even though you can't be here in person, I hope that you will find a way to dwell in the house of the Lord. And if you have children or grandchildren, that you will find a way to have a conversation with them, or play a game with them, or do something that helps them to see that you all live in the house of the Lord together. That's how it works. That's how we become part of the adopted family of God.